Praise the Lord. Anxious to get into this with you. We're dealing again with verse 42 of Acts chapter 2. And we've been, five Sundays on this particular verse, but 6 Sundays, I guess. Now, on this particular verse, we are going to get off this verse. We're moving on next Sunday. With great fear came upon every soul. But anyhow, verse 42, we're dealing with the idea of prayer, which the early church was into, the whole subject of prayer. And I want to get into that with you and what that was and how that was. And this is one of the favorite themes of intimacy with Jesus as expressed in the whole idea of prayer. So we're looking at Acts chapter 2. We'll begin our reading at verse 40. A description is being given, of course, of the early church. Pentecost has happened. 3,000 have just heard a message. Over 3,000 have just heard a message that's been preached by Peter, and it cut them to the bone. They have responded in desire of all that God would want to do. They are the ones who crucified Christ. They have become deeply aware of that. And in that awareness, they have repented and are baptized. And a subtraction from the old takes place, and they have been brought into and planted in the new. And a verse from verse 41 down through verse 47 is a description of what the new is like. You cannot be subtracted without being added. And the emphasis of the passage, of course, is on the addition itself. And in verse 40 it says this, "With many other words he testified and exhorted them, saying, 'Be saved from this perverse generation.' Then those who gladly received his word were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and in fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in prayers." Now we're going to risk being really technical as we begin this study of prayer, and it's going to turn some of you off. But please don't let that happen. In fact, I would encourage you to take notes and think this through. And we're going to do some grammar, and I know that really excites some of you. But it's really a basis and is really important in understanding the passage. And it's a repeat of some of what we've already talked about, but it becomes so essential in understanding verse 42. As you look at verse 42, "And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in breaking of bread, in prayers." They, obviously, is the subject. So he's talking about the 3,000, the 120. So 3,120, the early believers, that's what we've got on our hands at this point. They are the they. There is one Greek word that is translated they were. It's not translated in our passage, which makes it really confusing as we even talk about it. But they were is a Greek word which is literally the subject and the verb of the sentence. And it's a state of being. It's the imperfect third person plural of a me. A me is the I am word. Moses said, "God, what is your name?" God said, "I am that I am." That's this word. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth." That's this word. I am. It's a state of being. It's not what he does, it's a state of being. So he's introducing this whole sentence with this state of being emphasis. And the reason that is so important is that he's going to talk about some things they were doing. And he doesn't want you to get wrapped up in what they were doing. He wants you to get wrapped up in what they were, which happened to spill into some things they did. But the emphasis is upon the state of being, what they were. They were. State of being. Now, imperfect, they were, is in the imperfect, which has the idea of kept on. It happened in the past, and it continues into the present, and just keeps on. So the emphasis of they were is is not, oh, this was for this moment. Oh, had an experience at an altar. Wow, wasn't that nice? No. This is, well, on Sunday I feel that. No, they were. It happened. It kept on happening. So they were continuing in this state of being. Now that is so significant in the passage that he turns around and gives us this Greek word that's translated continued steadfastly. It's a participle, meaning it's a verb that acts like an adjective. So it modifies the state of being. So do you get the double emphasis? They were imperfect, which means it kept on. And then just to double emphasize, he uses the word continued steadfastly. So he says that gives you that idea of the continuation of this, that they were in a state of being and it just kept on and on and on and on. They got up in it in the morning. They went to bed in it at night. They had fellowship in it. They prayed in it. They broke bread together in it. They came to class in it. They studied the apostles' teaching in it. They were in this state of being. And the state of being just kept on and on and on. They never got out of it. It's kind of like your face. You never lose it. It's just, it was just a continual thing in their lives. It just kept on. And again, he emphasizes it not only in the verb they were, imperfect, kept on, but in the adjective, which is continued steadfastly. Did you get that? So the emphasis, the whole emphasis is this state of being. Now, when he gets done talking about this state of being, he says, oh, by the way, this spilled into, and what is called in the Greek, datives. It's a locative dative, telling you the location in which the state of being took place. Here's this state of being. He says, oh, by the way, this took place in the location of the apostles' teachings. So while they were investigating, while they were learning, while the revelation of Jesus was coming to their lives, they were in this state of being, continually in the apostles' teaching. Oh, they were also in fellowship, which you'll remember has the idea of business, not just hanging out or eating pizza, but business. They came together in a business enterprise. They were in business with God. And while they were in business with God, putting their heads together with the divine, they were in this state of being. So the desires of the heart of God became their heart. This became their business. Oh yeah, they had jobs, but this became their primary business. And their jobs became the platform by which they carried out the kingdom business. That is phenomenal, folks. They were in this state of being. It happened while they were being taught and the revelation of Christ was taking place in their lives. It happened while they were in the enterprise on their daily life structure as they had their jobs and did their thing. They were living in this state of being. And it happened also in the breaking of bread. They got together and ate. But it wasn't just eating, as you'll remember. The cross is planted in the middle of it. And in the breaking of bread has the idea of the whole crucifixion, his death and his resurrection. So the cross was in the middle of the state of being. So you got this state of being in which the teaching took place, in which they experienced the enterprise of God in the business, in which the cross was the style in which they lived, and then prayer took place in the state of being. Okay, now, one reason why I wanted to go through that with you and tried to be technical is that same, this is so awesome, that same, think of this, that same identical sentence structure is found in Acts chapter 1, verse 14. Same thing! Like, it's not accident, like, I really want you to get this, like, this is really what was taking place in the early church. And in chapter 1, verse 14, it says, these all continued with one accord in prayer. Now, it's the same identical sentence structure. I wish you could see it in the Greek. Again, you've got this Greek word. The subject is these in the English, these, but it could be they. And the verb is were. It's not translated. Sorry, but it's not translated. It says these all continued. These all, just change that and put these or they were. Same word, same structure as in verse 42, chapter 2. So it's this state of being again. He's emphasizing, in chapter 1, verse 14, they were in this state of being. Now we're talking prior Pentecost here, remember? They're in an upper rooms, and they're waiting for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And during that time, they were in a state of being. This state of being was in the imperfect tense, which means it kept on. It was a flow. They never got out of it. They lived in, they'd been 40 days in the resurrected presence of Jesus, and he had now ascended, and they were just in this, captured by him and awestruck with him, and in this state of being, of his presence and the wonder of his being, and they were just absolutely enthralled with the whole wonder of his presence and what he had planned for them. And in this state of being, it just kept on and on. They got up with it in the morning. They went to bed with it, this state of being at night. Hey, when they ate, they had this state of being. As they talked to each other, this state of being was a part of their lives. This was their life. This was their deal. They were in this state of being, he said. And to double emphasize that, he gives the same identical, isn't this phenomenal? He gave the same identical Greek word translated continued steadfastly. Same structure, same words, same deal as in our passage. So he said, they were, that was keeping on. Then he adds this adjective, continued steadfastly, giving you this double emphasis that this state of being that they're in just was day after day after day after day. They never got out of it. Who would want to? They just lived in this flow of this state of being. Now he says this state of being, talking Acts chapter 1, verse 14, that they're in, and it just kept on and on and on in this state of being. It showed up in prayer. Now in verse 14 of chapter 1, he doesn't give the other three, because it isn't about the activities. Come on. It's about this state of being. And this state of being spilled into this, you want to call it an activity? Really not a good word. You want to call it a function? Not a good word. Something they did? Not a good thing. They had this state of being is characterized by prayer. Could you have prayer without the state of being? Not what they did. Did you get that? Can you have prayer without this state of being? Not like they did. Not what they're talking about. You could do prayer book stuff. You could read out of the prayer book. You could have a list. You could say, now all bow your heads, we're going to pray. You could have prayer before your meal, but that's not what they're talking about here. See, they're talking about a state of being that was characterized by this prayer thing. Now, before Pentecost, they had this. After Pentecost, they had this. This state of being. So this is not, well, they didn't get this until the fullness of the Spirit came. That's not true. They had this before Pentecost. They had this after Pentecost. No doubt it was heightened after Pentecost. Everything was better after Pentecost. But we have to admit, they had this before, they had this after. In other words, he's saying before and after, same picture, man. State of being. Christianity has never been, it was this one time, now it's this, and no. It's always been state of being that just keeps on. And in that state of being are these things that just kind of emerge that are characteristic of the state of being, which is, one of them is prayer. Now, it was intriguing to me that this Greek word translated continued steadfastly is used 6 times in the New Testament, 6 times in the book of Acts. 3 of them, that's half of them, are related to prayer. So this state of being that they just kept in on just kind of just really echoes with the whole idea of prayer. Could you be in the state of being without having prayer? Probably not. You mean we have to pray? No, you don't have to pray. How much do you have to pray? No, that's a doing thing. This is a state of being. So this is not how long and how much. I absolutely despise the how long and how much stuff. We want revival in the church. How could we get it? Prayer, brother, prayer. If we would pray, God would give revival. How much prayer? 100 hours. Oh, brother, we prayed 99 and a half and missed it. See, that's ridiculous. Isn't that ridiculous? How much time does it take to talk God into something? Well, that's not prayer. Prayer is this state of being where his heart and my heart have become one, and we're in this enterprise together, and we're in business together, and the cross is in the middle of this thing, and I'm in this state of being, and in this intimacy of fellowship. Whoa, you know what we call that? Prayer. Now, this also shows up in Acts chapter 6, verse 4. Don't even need to go there. We will give ourselves continually, there's our word, this continued steadfastly word, continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. It's the situation where the apostles are saying, you know, there's all this stuff that needs to be done, and we don't want to get distracted, so we want to be sure that we're focused in on this state of being. And again, one of the states of one characteristic of the state of being is the issue of prayer. So there's the 3 times it shows up in the book of Acts. It's a different grammar structure in Acts chapter 4 of chapter 6 verse 4, but it's the same intent with the same words. This continuing steadfastly, this state of being, and prayer is a part of that state of being. Now, in thinking about that, this verse in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 17, which some of us quote a lot, is because it's short and we can remember it, is the verse that says, pray without ceasing. So everything we just got done saying to you smells of that, doesn't it? So this is another way of saying the same thing. Here's the state of being that just keeps on and on and on. It continues steadfastly, double emphasizes it, and it spills into, or has the characteristic of, intimacy, which is all about prayer. Paul says, here's what I want you to be a part of. I want you to be a part of this praying without ceasing. Now, the Greek word for prayer in that verse, praying without ceasing, is the same Greek word we're dealing with in our passage. Without ceasing is really, I never knew this. I had never dug into this in the Greek before, but I got into the Greek word that's translated without ceasing. It doesn't mean once in a while. It doesn't mean in continual intervals. It doesn't mean every single time you eat, you should have prayer before you eat. It doesn't mean that. Now, don't tell anybody I said this, but it's okay to eat without praying. Never mind. We'll discuss it later. So here's this, pray without ceasing, which again does not mean on regular intervals. Every morning when you get up, you should start the day with prayer. That's not what this means. Without ceasing literally means without interruption or intermission. So if you're praying without any interruptions, if you're praying without any intermission, you know, at a ball game, they play hard, then they have an intermission. Or is that the movies? I don't know. Anyhow, here it is. That's not what he's discussing. He's saying, the prayer I want you in on is all the time, every moment, all the moments, day in and day out. Get up with it in the morning, go to bed with it at night, while you're at your job, when you're eating and when you're not eating. This is day in and day out. Every single second, we want to be able to come up to you and say, what are you into? And you'd say, whoo, I'm praying, man, I'm praying. Because you pray without interruption. That's not realistic. I mean, we can't all be preachers. Some of us have to work. I mean, there are other things in life besides prayer. Lots of things in life besides prayer. I mean, things need to be done. See, there's the Mary thing and the Martha thing. Somebody's got to be in the kitchen. Amen. Somebody's got to cook the meals. Somebody's got to wash the dishes. See, Mary can sit at the feet of Jesus. She can be into the prayer thing, but the only reason she can do that is because Martha's doing the dishes. So Martha's making Mary spiritual. That's the way we've been raised, right? But that's not Bible, obviously. Which is why I just went through all of this, and if you didn't get it, I'll do it all again. So say you got it. You got it, okay. So you can see this is Bible, man. This is you. What God expects is for you to be in a state of being that just goes on and on and on and on. You get up with it, you go to bed with it, you live in it, you live in this state of being. And one of the strong characteristics of the state of being is prayer. So obviously, do I have the nerve to say this? Do you suppose we've had the wrong idea of prayer all this time? Do you suppose that what we called prayer hasn't been prayer? I think another time I described to you what I believed prayer was, what the content of prayer is. I had that figured out all my life, pretty much, raised in it. My dad was a pastor. We had small churches, usually 2 churches. We had the cottage prayer meeting thing, which meant you prayed in homes. That's basically what that meant. So every week we went to these cottage prayer meetings, 2 of them a week. One for one church, one for another. And men in a home, and nobody was there except people with gray hairs. And I was the only kid, and I heard these people pray. I learned what prayer is. Prayer is most effective if it's loud. God is hard of hearing. I heard that. And it probably isn't that God is hard of hearing, but it tells the intent of your heart when you yell. Because when you get upset, when you really mean something, you raise your... So obviously, if you're really into prayer, So effective prayer is getting in God's face with your face red, yelling at God, you need to, and I'm telling you, God. After all, we're the people on the ground. And we know best. So he ought to take our advice on what needs to be done. And it's really, if you want to be effective in prayer, you need a metal chair. I learned that really young. You need one of these metal chairs we got, and if you need one, we'll loan you one so you can really be effective in prayer. And you hit it about every other word. And just wham, yelling, wham, yelling, wham. That's really effective. And if you do it at 3 a.m., then your family knows you're spiritual. Prayer. Is that what this is all about? Do you think that's what they're referring to? Do you think all of these, can you imagine 3,120 people all on their knees beating a metal chair crying at the top of their lungs? Now, just for clarity's sake, if 3,120 of us got together and beat on a metal chair and screamed at the top of our lungs and we're really sincere before God, He would honor that. So it's not, well, that's bad. But folks, if 3,120 of us got together and we all whispered, He would honor that. In fact, if 3,120 of us didn't even get together, but we all agreed, He would honor that. In fact, fact, if we would all live in the Spirit, in the state of being, and in the flow of His Spirit, He would honor that. So God is very faithful. We understand that. So we're not knocking anything. We're trying to find out what on earth were these boys into. Because what these guys were into, I want to be into that. Now, I discovered some things that's really interesting to me. The Greek word that's used for prayer in chapter 1, verse 14, and in our passage, chapter 2, verse 42. The Greek word for prayer, in its noun form, is used 37 times in the New Testament. It's used 9 times as a noun in Acts alone. In Acts, this same word, used 9 times in Acts as a noun, is used 16 times as a verb in Acts. Let's see, that's 16 plus 9, that's 25 times this word is highlighted in the book of Acts. There's only 28 chapters, so that's almost every chapter in the book of Acts emphasizes the idea of whatever these boys were doing. On top of that, this was really startling, I discovered in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just in the Gospels, this Greek word translated prayer is found 8 times as a noun. In the Gospels, in the 4 Gospels, it's 8 times as a noun, and it's 47 times as a verb. But what's so significant? Let's see, that's 55 times. 55 times this word, this Greek word for prayer, is used in the Gospels, and every single time, this is startling, every single time, this will blow your socks off, every single time, this will change your whole view, every single time this word is used in the Gospels, it's Jesus who's doing it or talking about it. The disciples in the Gospels, it's never recorded where the disciples ever did this. Now, if you're like I am, you look at that and say, well, wait a minute. The disciples prayed because that was a part of the Jewish structure. They had the hour of prayer down at the temple. And they would go like at 3 p.m. in the afternoon for the hour of prayer. Come on. So these boys, being good Jews, went to the synagogue or to the temple and prayed. So prayer was a normal practice of their day. And yet it's never recorded in the Gospels that they did this. Whatever they did, they didn't do this. This word has different content. This word is different than the normal Jewish prayer thing where you read the prayer book, do the chant thing, do whatever you do. Something is different here. So when you come to the book of Acts, think about this. When you come to the book of Acts, this is the first time it's recorded that the disciples ever did this. Right here. Can you imagine the first time? They looked at one another and said, you know, that prayer thing that Jesus talked about, He taught us how to do it. Our Father, which art in heaven. Yeah, He taught us how to do it. We saw Him do it, but we never, ever did do that. Let's try it. What do you suppose they did? Did they walk back and forth? Did they all get on their knees? Did they bang metal chairs? What do you suppose they did? The very first time. This is the very first time. Maybe it doesn't matter how they did it. Maybe it's just that something, can you imagine? They begin to, and as they begin to pray, this state of being begin to spill into an expression of the intimacy. Can you sense it? They begin to say, whoa, what's going on? It's like there was a whole new access to God that they had never, ever experienced before. Like the emptiness of the whole thing was gone, and it was like embraced. It's the difference between talking on the telephone and kissing your wife. See, that didn't go over well. It's a whole different, it's like a whole new access. It's like a veil had been ripped. Can you see the angels standing up in heaven saying, what was that? Whoa, there went another one. Wow. Hey, we've had prayers sent up here before. In an Old Testament they prayed some, but we've never had, what on earth? This is in the name of Jesus. A whole new deal is going on, and there's a whole new access to the very intimacy and presence of God that they had never, ever, ever had before. What on earth was this like? It was not business as usual. Now, if you go to 1 Timothy, don't need to turn there, but you can see this, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1. The reason I'm bringing this verse up is because the three major words in the New Testament for prayer that relate to prayer are given to us in this one verse. Therefore, I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. So the three major words that refer to prayer are supplications, prayers, and intercessions. Supplication is just exactly what you think it is, making a request. Supplications can be used in relationship to man. I do supplication when I ask you for something. That's supplication. I can also ask God. Then it's related to prayer. Intercessions is a beefed up version of the supplication. Supplication is, hey, how would you like to do this for me? Intercession is, oh, you got to do this. It's the wringing of hands. It's the blood pressure is high. It's a desperation. So intercession is a different level than supplication. But the word prayer, supplication, intercession, then there's this word prayer. Prayer is a devotional term. It has to do with relationship. It has to do with intimacy. It's not supplication, although that can be a part of it. It's not intercession, although that can be a part of it. The idea is that of intimacy and that of oneness and relationship. And I went back into the Gospels and looked up all the places where this word is used. And one of them you're really familiar with. Jesus comes into the temple, puts a cord into the form of a whip, cleans house, breaks boards over his knees, turns doves loose in the sanctuary, just literally spills things, money all over the floor, just tears the whole place up. When he got done, he stood up and said, I'm going to tell you why I did this. You're probably interested to know. You have made this place a den of thieves. I will not have it. This is a house of prayer. That's our word. Now, what was Jesus saying? This is a house of prayer. Nothing is going to go on in this house except prayer. Hey, look at me. I'm telling you, we're not going to do anything here but prayer. Now, what do you think he was meaning? That we are all going to get on our knees, beat a metal chair, and scream at the top of our lungs? Obviously not. Because they did all kinds of things in the temple. Sacrifices, lambs. That was done in the temple. They sang the psalms. That was done in the temple. They lit candles, incense. That was done in the temple. They did chants. That was done in the temple. All of this stuff that God commanded them to do, they did in the temple. Is he saying you shouldn't do it? No. See, the word prayer engulfs all of that. Come on, think with me. It engulfs all of that. That prayer is not this isolated, get on your knees and address God. It's this intimacy. It's this relational. Do you know what we're doing when we sing songs? Oh, we're praying, man. Do you know what we're doing right now? Do you think God isn't hearing us, involved in this, and interact? Do you think he's not taking his word and applying it to your heart? That's prayer, man. We're praying right now. When you're discussing, arguing with your wife, you know what you're doing? Praying, man. There is indication in the Old Testament when the Israelites were griping and complaining and, oh, we're in the wilderness and we hate this and we liked it the way it was in Egypt better than we like this. And when they were griping and complaining, that went up as an aroma to God and was called prayer. Even your gripes are prayers. So when you're complaining and I look at you and say, tell your gripes to Jesus, that's exactly what you're doing. Do you see then that the concept of prayer literally begins to engulf, the state of being, and as I live in this state of being in intimacy with Him, everything that's a part of my life is, so could I pray without interruption? Could I live in a flow of His oneness? Could I live in the practice of His presence? Could I live in the wonder of He's intimately involved in everything that's going? Do you see how much greater that is, folks, than having a problem? Well, I got to go pray and tell God about this. Like He isn't it something to be in the middle of a problem and know I don't have to even tell Him about this? He is here and we are so intimate and I'm in this state of being and this is automatically His problem and He's involved in the problem as it happens, man. Isn't that a wonder? Wouldn't it be something to live in where your joys and your pains and the problems and the blessings and they all are so intermixed that you don't, and when we talked about you don't need to pray before your meals, it's okay to pray before your meals. It's a good thing to pray, to thank God for your food. But man, if you've been in this state of being and your heart is so grateful, it's been pouring out to Him all day long, it is a little ritualistic. It's not bad. It's good for the family, and especially when you're with others, it impresses them. But to live in a gratitude of thanksgiving to Him where you've already been thanking Him all day because every good thing that's ever come to you has been because of Him. That's what they're talking about. Now, if you say, and here's what I said, I don't really think this is practical, and trying to discuss this and explain it, I thought to myself, nobody will ever get that. I'll never be able to explain that. And then I just laughed and said, yes, you will get it, because we've been doing this. Not in relationship necessarily to Jesus, but we've been doing this with ourselves. Hey, I'm in this state of being, of self. I was born with a self-love that just won't quit, man. Oh, how I love myself. Oh, just feel like hugging myself. I'm really in love with myself. In fact, I'm so in love with myself that I stay with myself all the time. I'm so in love with myself that all the things that happen to me are all filtered through myself. Everything that takes place in my life, I automatically filter it through. How will it affect me? What's it about? How am I going to? Well, I wonder what I should. Well, how should I? See, it's all about me. If it's good, I pulled that one off. If it's bad, well, somebody did that to me. See, because I'm all wrapped up in myself. I protect myself. I guard myself. I am so wrapped up. My whole life is in a state of being that relates to myself. I'm always about myself. My very words talk about my rights. I want. I should. They couldn't. They shouldn't. It's all about. Well, this whole thing is about me. I'm all wrapped up in this state of self. Everything that spills out of my life is because I pulled it off. Every good thing. It spills out of my life is because, well, I pulled it off, man. I got the education. I worked hard. I earned the money. I did. This is all about, my whole life is related to. I mean, there's never a moment. I go to bed with this. I get up with this. My whole life, I kiss my wife with this. Everything is about, I go to church with this. My whole life is about, oh. What would happen if I'd come to Jesus and say, Lord, would you take me and crucify me so that the center point of my life, instead of became Him? And instead of embracing, I would embrace, and as self has been in my life, He would now be in my life. And as I have consistently lived with self, been sourced by self, everything related to self, as self has been the intricate, interwoven fiber of my being, wouldn't it be something if Jesus became that? And I went to bed with Him. I got up with Him. He sourced my life. That my embrace with Him never turned loose. What would you call that? They called it prayer. Well, preacher, if I really got that in my life, what would you call me? Christian. That's what one is. And do you see the wonder of that? That it's not, well, I don't do that. Well, I go there. The doing thing compared to the embrace thing. They were yanked out of their sick and stupid culture. Get out while you can. They were subtracted from that and planted into a state of being that they just lived in all the time. And one of the characteristics of this state of being was this intimacy of prayer. Jesus, I got to have this. I got to have you like this in my life. I don't want to come to church and visit you. Absolutely. I don't want to have a special prayer closet where you live and I go to see you. I'm not interested in the big man upstairs stuff. I'm not interested in a hotline to heaven. I'm not interested in getting on the telephone and never getting a busy signal. I'm not interested in that a bit, God. I'm not interested in talking to you. I'm interested in living with you. I'm interested in you indwelling me. I'm interested in, as I have lived with myself, could I now live with you? As self has been the motivating factor of my life, could you now be the motivating factor of my life? Please, God, this morning, whatever you need to do in me so this can happen. Come on, God. Because I know I can't get into this state of being. I can't even turn myself loose, God. I'm incapable of even surrendering myself because I love myself so much. So there is no chance I'm going to get out of this self thing. Because even if I pulled it off, God, it would be more self. And self never gets out of self. So you're going to have to come and do something in me. So I'm begging you, oh God, would you bring about such a wonder of transformation, and such a change in thought process, such a radical alteration in the inner heart? Would you just so go to the depth of my being and literally change me from the inner gut of my system to the whole flow of my life? Until as I have lived with self, I would be living with you. And the one who is the chief of need, the one who is the supreme one who needs, the top person on the list in this sanctuary this morning that must experience the depth of this in his life, it's this boy right here. Pull me to your heart. I want to know how to pray like they did. Altar's open. Anybody want to join me in singing?
Lord, I want to be all